Hi guys, welcome back to a brand new episode. This will actually be number 13. I hope it's not Friday today. And last episode we cleaned up the menu with some buttons and a background. Why not continue with the UI this episode as well? So let us add a pause menu with its functions. But before we start, just a quick recap and then we're off. We spent most of our time building our button class, everything from displaying it with images and adding the mouse events. Once that was working, we made sure that when we pressed the button, we changed the game state. After the buttons, we added a nice background that ties the buttons together. We also added a few fixes, one where the animation was messed up and one that made sure that the player speed is tied to the game scale. And that, my friends, was the last episode. Now, let us dive into another one. We will add 3 different types of buttons today, and there is some difference between them. The first kind we will add is the ones that will decide if we unpause, restart the level, or we go back to the menu. Simple buttons, just like the ones we added in the previous episode. Our second kind of button will be for our music and sound effect toggle. Here we will not change any state or unpause the game, we will just toggle a boolean, true and false. The last button will be the trickiest to add. It will be a button, but we will be able to drag it, acting as a slider for our volume. But we will set a limit for how far we can drag it. And depending on how far it is to the right on the slider, we will set the volume to that. 100% if it's all the way to the right, and it will be muted if it's maxed to the left. And just a quick FYI, as I mentioned volume and music buttons, we will not add sounds in this episode. That will come in a later episode. Hopefully. We're gonna begin by heading over to our playing state, or playing class if you will. Inside here, we're actually going to add the very important boolean that's gonna decide whether or not to show the pause screen or not. So we will need a private boolean paused. And depending on the state of this boolean, we're either going to show the pause screen or not. And with this boolean created, we can head over to our UI package and right click to create a new class. And this class will simply be PauseOverlay. And this PauseOverlay will need a constructor. PauseOverlay. And we will need to store a few things, but we're going to take them one at a time. First, we're going to add the methods that we will need inside here, which will be a public void update. We need to update it. We need a public void draw. We need to draw everything. Graphics G. And import it. Like so. Then we will need a couple of mouse events. We will need a public void mouse move. Actually, let's just go over here. Let's just be lazy and copy all of these. We will remove the code, but we will copy all this. Mouse clicked we will not use. So we might as well. Let's just do something like that. We will use mouse moved. We will use mouse released. Pressed, yes. Key released. No, we will not use the keyboard in our pause overlay, I don't think. No. So, bye-bye. But we will need a public void mouse drag. We haven't used mouse drag yet, but we will need it, like so. And we can remove this override. We're not overriding anything. We're just calling it like normal. Something like that. Alright, so we have all the methods we need. Well, for now, we most likely will add more as we go along, but these are the biggest ones and the most obvious ones that we will need. So let's continue by adding the background for our pause menu. I think that if we get our background in order, then it will be much easier for us to decide where our buttons should be. So let's start with the actual background. First, we're going to need, well, the actual background image. And I got one here that I made. So the text is already there and it's all made. All we need to do is place the buttons and then add the buttons functionality. So this image we're gonna drag and drop inside our res folder. And of course, all images and assets will be available on GitHub and on my website. So if you need to download it, you can find it on either of those. So the pause menu is right there. Perfect. So let's head over to our utils package, load and save. And let's create a new static string here. And we can call it pause background. It's a background, it's for pause. Yeah, that looks all right. And it's actually called pause menu. Fine, that's all right. Pause menu. Maybe not the perfect name, but you know, as long as it matches. Then we save that. And we don't have to close it. We're gonna add more images later. And at the very top, we're gonna add our private buffered image background. And we need to import as always. And in the constructor, we say load background. And of course, we're going to need some integer variables here for the position and width and height. Private int background x, bg background, so bgy, bg width, and bg height. Saving that. So in here, background, let's just call it background image, so we know it's an image. And this image is equal to load save dot get sprite atlas load save dot pause background, like so. And we need bg width is equal to background image dot get width times game dot scale. And scale is a float, and we need an integer, so we need to recast this. And the same will go for our width, height, height times game scale. All right. Well, where should it be? Probably in the middle. So bg x is equal to game dot width divided by 2 plus, no, minus bg width divided by 2. So in the center, minus the width divided by 2. And for y, bg, y should be, let's go with 100 and see. Let's see what we have. And now for our draw method, g.drawImage. And we're gonna go with this one. Background image, bg, y, width, height, and null. Yeah, perfect. And for us to actually see this, we need to go to our playing. And up here, we add a private PauseOverlay. PauseOverlay. And init classes PauseOverlay with this new PauseOverlay. Like so. And of course, we need to import it as well. Beautiful. And in our draw method, we just say PauseOverlay.draw. Let's just draw it right away and see the result. I think that is a good position, actually. Maybe a little bit up, so let's say 50 instead of 100. So to our PauseOverlay, and instead of 100, we say 50, and of course we need to go game scale, but we have 2, so that would be 100. Let's go 25 times game.scale. And this of course could be a float, so we need to recast this. All right, let's give it a try again. That looks pretty good. All right, so we have the position of it. Good. Now let's add the buttons. And just like the background image, we need some images for our buttons. And I selected these. So we have volume on and volume off, both pressed, mouse over, and normal. So we're gonna drag those into our res folder. And back to load save. Copy this line. Paste it. And then we have pause background no. That's called sound buttons. Yeah, sound buttons works. And the file name was sound_button. That looks alright. And then back to our pause overlay. And now with the image imported, we should actually create the button. And we're gonna do this the easiest way, and that is to go into our UI package and create a new class. And this class will be our super class for our pause buttons, or pause button. It will simply store the position and also the hitbox, the bounce, so to speak. So we will need a private int x, y, width, height. We will need a private rectangle bounce, just like we have for our menu buttons, and then of course import that. Anything else? No, but we will need a public pause button, and we'll need to import these values. But before we do anything, it should not be private, it should be protected. I learned that the hard way. Protected for both. And then int x, int y, int width, and int height. This.x equals x, this.y equals y, this.width equals width, and this.height equals height. And then we have create bounce method for our bounce. Bounce equals new rectangle. And we're gonna give it x, y, width, and height. Yeah, that looks good. And we will need to be able to change x and y, width and height. No, we will never need it. We're not gonna store any images here. We're only gonna store the position and the bounds, and of course we will need getters. So source, generate getters and setters, bounds, width, height. Yeah, let's take them all actually. I'm not sure if we will need getters for width and height, but better to have them and not need them than to need them and not have them. I think the pause button class is pretty good. So we can go now into our UI again, right click and create that sound button. So we will call them sound button. And this sound button will extend pause button. Extends. And we need somewhere to store our images for the sound buttons. So private, buffered, image, and a 2D array. Because we have a button atlas with 3 times 2. So might as well use a 2D array here. And we're gonna call it sound images. And we need to import that too. And of course we need to load the images. So load sound images. Create that method. We will need a buffer image temp to temporarily store the button atlas equals load save dot get sprite atlas load save dot sound buttons. Yeah. And then we need to initialize the sound images array is equal to new buffered image, and it's gonna be 2 and 3. And now we can actually make a nested for loop. In other words, a loop in a loop. So int j equals 0. J is less than sound images dot sound images, not sounds image, sound images dot length j plus plus, and for int I equals 0, I is less than sound images j dot length I plus. And now we can call sound images, those two brackets, j and I is equal to temp and get subimage. And now we need to figure out the sizes of these images. And since we need to have the size before we even enter here, we should probably store them in our constant class. And we have buttons here. Maybe we should have named it something else and divide them differently, but that's all right actually. We can have another class here actually, so public static class pause buttons and then brackets. So we have one class for the buttons for our menu, and now we have a class for our pause buttons. And the first value we're going to type out here is the size of the buttons. They're the same width as they are height, so we're going to call it public static final int sound size equals, or rather sound size default equals 42, because they are 42 in width as well as height. And then we need one for the actual size in game. So public static final int sound size is equal to, and recast it to int, because we're going to use scale. So sound size default times game.scale. And do we need anything else with the pause buttons width and height? No, we do not. So we're going to save this, go to our SoundButton class, import static utils dot constants dot ui dot pause buttons dot star. So we get all of them. So for our sound images, we're going to set width to sound size default and as well sound size default, like so. And I times, well, you guessed it, sound times default, and j times sound size default. So we have sound images, temp get subimages, I times size, j times size, size. So yeah, that looks alright. And then of course, just like the other buttons, we're gonna need a public void update. And we're gonna need a public void draw graphics G. And we need to import this, import graphics, like so. And now with this draw method added, we can actually test draw the image. So let's just create a g.draw image, and we're gonna select the one with width and height. And the image we're going to need is in the sound image 2D array. And we're gonna figure out some neat way of accessing the correct one, but let's just try the first one and the first one that as well. And we're gonna display it at X, Y, width and height, and of course null there. And that's because we're gonna use these 4 values. So I think we can draw this one. And now we can actually head over to our PauseOverlay and create 2 sound buttons. So private sound button, music button. Yeah, that's a good name. And then we have SFX button, sound effects button. And then of course we need to create sound buttons. And just create this method right here. So music button is equal to new sound button. And for the X and Y, we're gonna type them up here because we're gonna have to scale it in case we are using game.scale, which we will use. Int sound X is equal to recast 450 times game.scale. And I'm naming it sound X because they're gonna have the same X, both the music button and the effects, sound effects button, but they will have different Ys. So int music Y will be equal to recast, and that's going to be 140 times game.scale, and int sfxy equals recast and 186 actually times game.scale. And that's our position for music and our sound button. So for X we say sound X, and for music Y we pass in the music Y. Width and height will be in our constant class, which were sound size. So sound size, let's see if we can access it right away. Nope, we need to import it. So import static utils dot constants dot UI dot pause buttons dot all dot star, so we get all of them. We might as well. And then for the button height is also sound size. And then of course we need to create the sound effects button as well. So equals, let's actually copy this line here. We only need to change one anyway, so it's the same X, the same width and height, but a different Y. And in our draw method here, we're gonna say, let's just actually add some comments here. So sound buttons, and at the top we can add some comments for our background. It's easier to see what is what. So our music button dot draw and our sfx button dot draw. So hopefully when we press play now, we're actually going to see those two buttons. And we did, and they are good size and the position is perfect. Now comes the fun part. Now we need to make them interactive with our mouse events. So let's get that going. Now we can head back to our sound button. So we need a few booleans. We will need a private boolean for mouse over. We will need one for mouse pressed. We will need one for... No, that's it. That's the booleans for over and pressed. But we will need one more boolean, and I'm gonna put it one step below, private boolean, and let's call it muted. This boolean is gonna determine if we are on the first row or on the second row. If it is true, we are muted, then we're gonna go for the second row here. If it's false, then we're gonna go for the first row here. So it's gonna be a 0 or a 1. So first we're going to add the actual getters and setters for them. So below our draw here, right click, source, generate getters and setters, muted, pressed, over, yeah, that's all we need. And in the update method we say if muted is true, then row index equals 1, else row index equals 0. And this row index we need to add as well. So private int row index, and we're gonna need one more for the different mouse events. So we're gonna call, let's call it column index. So we have a row and a column. And in our update, if mouse moved, didn't we call it mouse moved? Mouse over, If mouse over, then call index is equal to 1. If mouse pressed, then call index is equal to 2. And of course we start with call index equals 0. And now we just press them in here. So row index, and then call index, like so. Alright, so I think we're done inside the SoundButton class for now. Alright, so to our PauseOverlay. So now we're gonna add the checks in all of these 3 mouse events. We don't have to worry about mouse dragged, because mouse dragged is only for the volume slider. But these 3 we are going to use. But before we start getting in there, we need a private boolean is in. We have this method in our state classes, but our PauseOverlay is not a state class, so we have to create this method again, but it will go fast. So mouse event E, and we need a button, and we're gonna use a pause button B. And the reason why we use the pause button here and not, say, the sound button is because then we would only be able to check the sound button, but we're gonna have a slider and also a button for our more normal button. So we would have to have 3 of these in order for us to check the bounce. But since pause button is the superclass of all of those 3, we can now just say pause button. And then we're going to add some code in here, of course. If button.get bounce contains e.getX, e.getY, we're gonna return true. But that's gonna look bad, so we're gonna remove one of these and that and call return, because we only need to have 1 line here. More is unnecessary. So it's going to return whatever this is. And now in our mouse pressed, if is in E and music button dot set mouse press true. But if it's not in our music button, we check if it's inside our is in E SFX button. If that's the case, then we say SFX button dot set mouse pressed true. And now we can actually copy this for our mouse released. If we are inside our music button, we add 2 brackets and move that one away. We also check if music button dot is mouse pressed. If it is pressed and we also release above it, we say what? We say music button dot set muted music button dot is muted. Now we are setting the muted to whatever muted is, but if we say not music button is muted, then we are flipping the actual value in here. So if it's true, then it becomes a false. If it's false, then it becomes true. Then we're going to do the same check here for our sound effects button. If sound effects button dot is mouse pressed, if that's the case, then SFX button dot set muted SFX button dot is muted, not mouse over, is muted. And then we flip it like so. And the last one is for our mouse moved, but we're gonna say music button dot set mouse over false, and also for our SFX button set mouse over false. We are resetting them right away, and then we do the check. We might as well copy this one. If it's in music button, set mouse over instead to true. And the same for our sound effects button. And if we try this now, we're not gonna get anywhere, but in our playing, we're gonna add a if paused because I think it was called pause in here. Yeah. If this one is true, that means we are paused, obviously, but we're gonna say PauseOverlay dot mouse pressed, and then we pass that one in. And we're gonna do this for all of them. And also for our mouse drag, but we don't have it yet, so we're gonna add it soon. But for our mouse released, we're gonna have mouse released, and for our mouse move, we're gonna have mouse move. And then we go back up here and set pause to true, so it's true from the start. Let's see if we can manipulate the sound buttons. We cannot. And that's because we didn't use the update method, only the draw. So our music button dot update, and then sfx button dot update. How about now? Most likely it's going to work. It's not working. It didn't work because we don't call PauseOverlay dot update. So how about now? Now we're calling PauseOverlay update. PauseOverlay update is calling the buttons to update. So third time's the charm, hopefully. All right, we have mouse over for both. I can press this one and I can switch it, but we never solved the actual mouse released. So maybe we ought to do that as well. So let's do that real quick in our PauseOverlay. But before we can call it in our mouse released inside PauseOverlay, we need to go back to our sound button and create a method here, public void reset pause. So we actually have something to call when we release the button. And we just want to say mouse over equals false, mouse pressed equals false. So in our PauseOverlay, mouse released, at the bottom we say music button dot reset boost, sound effects x button dot reset boost. Let's see if it works better now. They work, pressed work. I mean, it's looking pretty good if you ask me. So now we can toggle music on and off, and also sound effects on and off. Wonderful. Damn, this episode is already 33 minutes long. I gotta split this into 2 parts. I have it all recorded, I just haven't edited it all yet. So the next part will come soon enough. We will add the 2 other types of buttons to our PauseOverlay in that update. So make sure that you're subscribed so you don't miss that one. Until then, take care now and have a wonderful day. Bye.